Most stories begin with someone searching for something. But this one? It began with a man who had already given up looking. A single dad walking through the snow when he found two little girls barefoot, silent, and wrapped in nothing but frost and fear. No names, no past, no one coming for them. Just a blanket with a faded letter W, and a secret that would change everything. Stay with us, because what happens next is not just a story of survival. It's a story of chosen, family, quiet miracles, and the kind of love that finds you when you least expect it. If stories like this touch your heart, consider subscribing, not just to follow more stories, but to remind yourself that kindness still changes lives. Now let's begin. Single dad found twin girls with no home, no clothes, no hope, unaware they'd bring a miracle. The snow had come early that year. By late October, Willow Creek Valley was already blanketed in a silence so thick even the crows had stopped complaining. The wind moved like an old man, slow, cold, full of memories. Eli West stood at the edge of his porch, coffee steaming in his gloved hands, staring out at the acres of white stretching beyond the barn. The old wooden structure sagged a little more each winter, but like him, it hadn't collapsed yet. He took a slow sip. Another morning, another sunrise without her. Then he saw them. Two lumps, small, motionless, curled together under the overhang of the barn like discarded firewood wrapped in cloth. He squinted through the frost-glazed window of his soul and stepped off the porch. The wind bit at his face as he moved closer, boots crunching ice-packed gravel beneath. 20 feet out, his breath caught. They were children, two little girls, twins by the look of them, huddled so tightly together, it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. They wore nothing but oversized flannel shirts and thin tights, soaked through, now frozen stiff at the edges. Their hair, golden and matted with snow, clung to pale cheeks, flushed red from exposure. One of them was awake, barely staring up at him through wide, frightened eyes. "Jesus," Eli muttered. He dropped the coffee without realizing it. He crouched down carefully. "Hey. Hey there, it's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." The little girl blinked slowly, unblinking tears frozen at her lashes. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The other girl didn't move at all. Eli reached out gently, sliding a hand beneath the weight of the blanket they'd wrapped around themselves, if it could be called that. It was more like a ragged curtain blue, with tiny embroidered flowers, and a faded monogram stitched into the edge W. A cold pang knifed through him, not from the weather. He pulled the bundle into his arms, feeling how light they were. Bones and ice. No child should ever be this cold. No child should ever be this quiet. He ran. Inside the cabin, Eli laid the girls on the old leather couch and threw 2 blankets from the cedar chest over them. The stove blazed, and he turned it up as high as it would go, the cast iron groaning in response. He grabbed towels, dry clothes, whatever he could find, then knelt beside the couch. The conscious twin flinched at his touch. "I know, sweetheart. I know," he said softly, wrapping her gently. "You're safe now. You're safe." He looked to the other girl, eyes closed, lips pale. Panic itched in his chest. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A heartbeat. Faint. But there. Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and exhaled a prayer into the ceiling beams. "Thank you," he whispered. He turned back to the one who was watching him. Her gaze hadn't left his face. "What's your name?" he asked. She blinked. No answer. "Can you speak?" Still nothing? He softened his voice further. "Can you nod, if you can understand me? Just nod." She held still. Then, like the snow loosening its grip on a buried leaf, her chin dipped the faintest inch. Eli nodded back. "Okay." That's good. She shifted slightly under the blanket just enough for her hand to slip out and reach for his. His breath caught again. He didn't move, just let her hand rest on his, her fingers barely curling. It was the smallest act of trust. But to him, it was everything. That night, as the blizzard picked up outside, Eli brought a mattress down from the loft and laid it near the stove. He bundled the girls beside him like a human shield against the storm outside, and the quieter one within. At some point past midnight, the snow raged so fiercely, it sounded like voices, whispers, that once belonged to another life, another home, another love. He turned toward the girls, checking on them again. The one who had reached for him was now fast asleep, curled protectively around her sister. Their cheeks had color again. Their breath came evenly. Then, out of nowhere, a soft sound broke through the room. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the stove. It was a whisper. "Daddy." Eli froze. He turned. One of the girls, he couldn't tell which, had murmured the word. Not loud, not clear, but unmistakably there. His throat tightened. He reached out and gently brushed snow-dried strands of hair from her forehead. "You're safe," he whispered. "I promise." He didn't know what kind of story they came from. He didn't know how two girls this small could end up half frozen under a barn roof with no name, no shoes, and no one looking for them. But he knew this much. They were here now, and they weren't alone. Not anymore. Juliet Hale had stopped listening to music the day they folded the flag. It sat neatly boxed on the shelf above her fireplace, a triangle of cloth, tight and clean, with corners sharper than the silence in her little home. Her late husband, Captain Nathan Hale, had loved Chopin. But ever since the military funeral 5 winters ago, Juliet hadn't touched the piano keys. Not once. Instead, she taught scales. She corrected finger placement. She showed children how to breathe through tremors and reach for high notes. But she never played for herself. Not anymore. So when Eli West called her early the next morning and asked with a voice scratchy and uncertain if she could come by and just check on some girls, she nearly said no. But something in the way he said girls, like he was still trying to convince himself they were real, made her pause. "You found them?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Out in the snow. I don't know what I think. They won't talk. They're not hurt, just quiet. I thought maybe music. I don't know, Juliet." There was a long silence between them, then she said quietly, "I'll come." The cabin smelled like wood smoke, and something warm, oatmeal maybe, or cinnamon. The fire in the stove hummed low, casting long amber shadows across the floor. 2 girls sat on a rug by the hearth, bundled in mismatched sweaters. One played with a scrap of yarn. The other stared into the flames, unmoving. Juliet stood in the doorway a moment longer than necessary. She'd taught dozens of children. She knew how to smile, how to kneel, how to be the calm presence in a storm. But these 2 weren't in a storm, they were after it. And somehow, that made their silence even louder. Eli met her eyes from across the room. "Juliet, this is Maisie and Mara. Do they speak?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. But they understand." Juliet nodded slowly and crouched beside the girls. "Hi," she said softly. "I'm Juliet. I'm a music teacher." She pointed to the upright piano in the corner of the room. "That's a beautiful old piano. Do you know what it sounds like?" Maisie blinked. Mara didn't move. Juliet looked back at Eli, who stood awkwardly behind her hat, still in hand, like he was waiting for permission to breathe. "May I try something?" she asked. "Of course." She walked over to the piano, brushed the dust from the keys, and sat down for the first time in half a decade. Her fingers hovered over the ivory old friends, long estranged, and then gently she began to play. It wasn't Chopin. It wasn't anything really, just the lullaby she used to hum to herself when Nathan was overseas, when she couldn't sleep. A melody with no name. Soft, wandering, fragile. She played one phrase, then another, eyes half closed. Then something changed. A second pair of hands, smaller, hesitant, touched the keys beside hers. She looked down. Maisie. She was barely tall enough to reach, but she pressed a D note, then an F, then two. More, not quite in rhythm, but perfectly in harmony. Juliet's hands froze. Eli had stepped forward without realizing it. Did she just? Juliet held up a hand to quiet him. She played again, a simple C chord this time, and Maisie answered, layering a high G. Not perfectly, but instinctively. Juliet's throat tightened. Then Mara stood too, and without a word, climbed onto the bench beside her sister. And just like that, without instruction or invitation, the twins began to play. They didn't know scales. They didn't follow time. But somehow, they moved together, weaving in and out of Juliet's melody like birds in flight, watching each other, nodding without speaking, breathing in tandem. It wasn't trained. It wasn't taught. It was remembered. Juliet stopped playing, her hands falling into her lap. The girls continued for a moment longer, then drifted into silence, as if their song had gently landed and folded its wings. No one spoke. Eli finally broke the quiet. What? Just happened. Juliet looked at him, eyes glassy, voice low. They're communicating, through music. He walked over slowly. But how would they know? I don't know, she said, kneeling before the girls. But this wasn't random. You don't find children like this by accident. Mara reached for her sister's hand and gripped it tight. Juliet noticed something, then a tiny scar on the inside of Mara's wrist, barely healed, in the shape of a loop. She didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, she looked at Eli. They need consistency, structure, and someone who can help them rediscover their voices in every sense of the word. He exhaled. I'm not sure I'm that person. Juliet stood. You brought them out of the snow. You gave them heat, food, music. Don't sell yourself short, Eli. He gave a quiet nod. She turned to the piano again, then stopped and looked back. I haven't played in 5 years, she said. Not since Nathan died. Eli said nothing but his eyes. Said, I understand. I thought music died with him. She continued. But those two, they just brought it back. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, I'll come back tomorrow. As she walked out into the snow, Eli stood at the door and watched her go. 2 cups of cocoa forgotten on the counter behind him, the last note of an untaught song still echoing in the corners of the cabin. Eli couldn't sleep that night. He lay on the mattress near the stove, arms crossed under his head, watching the shadows from the fire dance across the ceiling beams. The twins slept soundly beside him, breathing slow, small forms, tangled beneath quilts, as if they'd been there all along, like puzzle pieces the house had been waiting for. He should have been exhausted, but his mind wouldn't settle. Every now and then, one of the girls stirred, and he'd roll to check on them, adjusting a blanket, tucking in a stray arm. The word they'd used still echoed in his head. Daddy. He hadn't been called that in 3 years. Not since Leah. Not since the miscarriage. Not since Mary left him standing in the hospital hallway with an empty car seat, and no idea how to grieve. Eli closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of smoke, lavender from the soap Juliet had brought over for the girls. Something about it calmed him, like the melody the twins had played earlier, something deeper than sound, a memory. The next morning, while the girls napped upstairs and the snow turned to rain, Eli decided to clean. He hadn't done a proper sweep of the place in months. Dust clung to everything, and footprints from the girls' tiny feet trailed across the floor like ghost tracks. He was wiping under the window seat When the leg of the stool snagged a board in the floor, it lifted slightly warped by the moisture maybe. He crouched and ran his fingers along the edge. A loose plank. He pried it up gently. Underneath, among a few spider webs and a mouse-chewed scarf, was an old tin box. Rusted shot around the edges, dented like it had been moved and forgotten more than once. He pulled it free, sat back on his heels, and popped it open with the tip of a flathead screwdriver. Inside, a child's crayon drawing a single photograph and a folded letter yellowed with time. He recognized the drawing first. Two little girls, stick figure style, standing in front of a piano. Above their heads were crooked halos, and in the corner, a bright blue butterfly. He swallowed hard. The photo beneath it showed two smiling girls, not more than 5, seated on either side of a younger Juliet Hale. All three were laughing. It looked like summer. The twins were holding seashells. One wore a bracelet made of buttons. On the back, in faint pencil, Silver Pine Music Retreat, June 2015. Eli stared at it, blinking. Then he unfolded the letter. To whomever finds this, if something's happened to me, and God help us, it might. I need someone to know the truth. Maisie and Mara aren't just gifted. They're a miracle. I don't mean musically, though. Yes, they hear things. Others can't. I mean, they were born at 25 weeks, survived seizures. NICU stays months of silence. And then, they began singing in harmony before they ever spoke their first words. They're mine, and they've saved me more times than I can count. But I'm scared. Someone's watching. I've seen the car 3 nights now, same time. I don't know if it's their father. I don't know if it's the man he owes. But I do know we have to run. If you find this, please love them. Please keep them safe. Tell them I never stopped listening. Ma. Eli sat still for a long moment, heart pounding so loudly he couldn't hear the wind outside. The monogram on the blanket, the W in the embroidery, the scar on Mara's wrist. It all meant something. He glanced upstairs. The house was quiet. Then he picked up the drawing again. The butterfly, just like the one Juliet had mentioned from the music retreat. He stood quickly, the floorboard forgotten at his feet, and grabbed his jacket. Juliet opened the door, still wearing her apron, flour on her hands. You said you didn't bake, he said, half smiling despite himself. I don't, she replied. But kids make you try strange things. What's wrong? He held out the letter. She read it silently. Once, then again, her face drained of color. I taught them, she whispered. Silver Pine, the summer program. I thought they looked familiar, but they were so young then. It's been years? You think it's really them? He asked. Juliet folded the letter carefully. I remember the butterfly. We used it for the trauma resilience workshops. Blue was the color of trust. Eli exhaled. The mother? She was scared. She was desperate, Juliet said softly. And someone was following them. The words hung between them. I want to help, she added after a pause. But we have to be careful. If this is connected to something, a custody issue or worse, we can't just pretend they don't exist. I'm not pretending, Eli said. I'm protecting. Juliet looked at him, then really looked, and saw not just a man who had taken in 2 girls from the snow, but someone still haunted by his own past, still aching to make something right. You're not alone in this, she said. Neither are you, he replied. She smiled faintly. Looks like we're both stuck now. I can think of worse places to be stuck, he murmured. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 people stitched together by accident memory, and the fragile hope that sometimes what is broken can still be beautiful. Outside, the rain softened to flurries, and somewhere between their 2 hearts, something began to thaw. The road to Silver Pine was barely more than a memory, now half covered in gravel, overgrown with dormant sagebrush and the white bones of forgotten snow. It wound up into the hills, like a question no one had answered in years. Juliet sat in the passenger seat of Eli's pickup, clutching the tin box in her lap as if it were something alive. In the back seat, Maisie and Mara huddled together beneath a quilt, faces pressed to the windows, watching the gray landscape slide past, like a dream too old to belong to them. "You sure about this?" Eli asked, his voice low. "No," Juliet admitted. "But I think we need to try." They had packed a thermos of cocoa extra coats and a notebook Juliet hadn't opened since the last day of the summer music retreat, the final entry written in Nathan's hand. "You teach light where others forget it exists." She hadn't read it since his funeral. But now, something had pulled her back to that page, to this place, to this moment. Fate, maybe, or something older. They reached the gates just after noon. The retreat had once been a haven, a cluster of cabins nestled along the edge of Lake Winora, with a converted church that served as music hall dining area and performance space. Now it looked like the aftermath of a fire left to mourn in silence. The church was gone, collapsed under the weight of a roof scorched and blackened. The cabins stood in skeletons. The trees nearby were dead at the root, their trunks gray with ash. Wind moved through the place without apology. Maisie stepped out of the truck first. Her feet crunched on charred gravel. Mara followed, holding her sister's hand. Juliet stood between them, her voice gentle. "Do you remember this place?" The girls said nothing, but their gazes moved slowly, intentionally toward the remnants of a red swing half hung from a broken beam, toward the ashes that had once been a piano Juliet herself had played, toward a small garden bed, still outlined in stone, where blue butterflies used to bloom every June. Eli approached an old bench, its wood soft with rot. He crouched and brushed away the dust. There, pressed into the wood beneath the bench's seat, were two tiny names carved in uneven lines. Maisie Punsa Mara, Summer. Juliet knelt beside him, breath caught in her throat. "They were here," she whispered. Eli nodded, and they remembered enough to find their names. Juliet rose, slowly turning toward the ruins of the church. "There was a music room here. That's where we did the trauma work. Piano, percussion, anything to help the kids open up again." Maisie tugged on Mara's sleeve, then pointed at something behind a collapsed wall, a piece of metal glinting in the light. Eli moved toward it and carefully pulled it free from the rubble. It was a bell. Small, handheld bronze and dented, the kind they used during music therapy when words failed. He brought it over to Juliet. She took it, eyes wet. "I gave this to a little girl the week before the fire," she said. She had stopped speaking after a violent incident at home, but she rang this bell every time she felt safe. She looked at Maisie. And Maisie, still silent, Ma reached for the bell, took it, and rang it once. The sound was soft, barely audible, but it echoed. It echoed through Juliet, through Eli, through the ghosts of what had been lost, and it said something neither of the girls could. "We remember." Inside the remains of the main lodge, they found what little was left: burned notebooks, bent forks, a collapsed shelving unit covered in mildew and time, no computers, no medical files. The fire, whether accidental or not, had taken almost everything. But behind a cracked closet door, Juliet discovered a storage bin sealed in plastic. Inside were art supplies, 2 water-damaged photo albums, and 1 hand-sewn memory quilt. Each patch was signed by a child. She opened it carefully, holding her breath. Maisie and Mara's names were there, stitched in crooked red thread beside a butterfly and a piano key. Juliet sat down on the floor. Their mother must have stitched this herself. Eli sank down beside her, watching as the girls stood in the doorway, sunlight casting long shadows behind them. This was a safe place once, he said. It still is, she replied. For as long as we remember why it mattered. He looked over at her, searching her expression. You ever think you'd come back here? She shook her head. I thought I buried it with Nathan. But now? He waited. She exhaled. Now I think grief just needed something to grow around. Eli rested his hands on his knees. I lost a daughter, he said quietly. 3 years ago. Miscarriage. We named her Leah. Juliet looked at him surprised. He hadn't said her name before. My wife left 6 months later. Said she couldn't stay in a house with a ghost. I'm sorry, Juliet said, her voice thick. He gave a small nod. I kept the nursery intact. Still do. Don't know why. You do, she said gently. You just haven't admitted it to yourself. He turned to the girls again. They were now kneeling in front of the piano ashes, Mara sketching something in the soot with her finger. Do you believe in second chances, he asked. I believe some of us don't get first ones, Juliet said. So yes, I believe in second, third, and fourth chances, as long as the heart's still beating. Outside, the wind picked up. Maisie stood and walked back to them. She held out a flat piece of wood, maybe from the old piano, and showed it to Juliet. On it, she had drawn a blue butterfly in perfect symmetry. No words, just that. Juliet took the piece into her hands, her voice catching. They remember the music room, she whispered. They remember what it felt like to be safe. Eli stood beside her, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. Then maybe it's time we start giving that feeling a home again. The letter came folded, official, and cold, like most things from the county. Eli found it wedged in his mailbox between a seed catalog and an overdue utility bill. The envelope was thin, but its weight dropped like a stone in his stomach. Notice of welfare concern. Unregistered minors reported at rural address. In-home visit scheduled. He stood at the mailbox for a long moment, snow crunching beneath his boots, the wind lifting the corner of the letter like a whisper meant to sting. The words were precise, legal, but the meaning was clear. Someone told. He walked back toward the house, past the barn, the clothesline, the half-sanded rocking horse he'd promised the girls he'd finish by Christmas. Maisie had picked out the paint color herself, a deep navy blue, like the sky before the stars come out. Inside, the girls were tracing leaves on construction paper, Juliet sitting cross-legged on the floor, beside them, smiling as if she'd always belonged there. She looked up. Her smile faded the moment she saw the letter in his hand. What is it? Eli handed it to her, without a word. Juliet read it once, then again. Her jaw tightened. They're coming Friday, she said quietly. That's 3 days. He nodded. Juliet stood slowly. We need to prepare. For what? To prove I'm not kidnapping them, that I feed them, that I don't lock them in a shed. No, she said, her voice calm. To show them this is a home, and a good one. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table. They're not even mine, Juliet. No birth certificates, no custody papers. Just 2 girls who showed up in the snow, with no one asking about them. What right do I have to keep them? Juliet crossed to him, her tone steady but firm. You have the right of someone who stayed, who fed them, sheltered them, listened to their silence, and still saw worth. That's more than most. Eli looked at her, eyes tired. I'm not enough. You're more than enough. And we'll prove it. For 3 days they scrubbed, sorted, fixed every crooked drawer, and wiped every smudge from the walls. Juliet filed a request with the county clerk to pull any historical records on the Silver Pine fire. Eli repaired the upstairs railing. The girls, sensing the tension, grew quieter but stayed close. On Thursday night, Juliet sat with them at the table folding paper butterflies, while Eli cooked grilled cheese and tomato soup. Maisie folded hers into a heart. Mara pressed hers to Juliet's hand. Juliet smiled and kissed the top of her head. "They'll see," she whispered. "They'll see what I see." The caseworker arrived promptly at 9. Her name was Michelle Carver, and she looked exactly like what Eli expected, mid-50s. Tan overcoat, glasses perched at the edge of her nose, clipboard in hand. But her eyes were kind, tired, but kind. She greeted the girls with warmth, knelt to their level, and accepted the drawings they offered her without flinching. "Butterflies," she said, smiling. "My favorite." She toured the house, checking for the usual food safety locks, sleeping arrangements. She examined the emergency plan taped behind the pantry door. She paused at the photos on the fridge, 2 crayon portraits of Eli labeled Dad. Juliet brewed tea while Michelle sat at the kitchen table flipping through her notes. "I don't see paperwork," she said gently. "And that's going to be a problem, I know," Eli said. "But we're working on it." Juliet filed for archived records. "We've contacted the nonprofit that ran the Silver Pine retreat. There's no surviving file on them, but we found the quilt their names are on it. We're not making this up." Michelle nodded. "I believe you." That surprised him. She set down the clipboard. "What concerns me isn't whether you love them. It's whether the system can accept love without documentation." Juliet leaned forward. "May I say something?" "Please. I've worked with children for most of my life, kids who lost more than names and records. These girls, they've been failed before. We can't fail them again because a filing cabinet went up in flames." Michelle studied her. "Are you a legal guardian?" "I'm a friend." "More than a friend," Eli added quietly. "She's their teacher, their advocate, and the only person who's made music come alive in this house again." Michelle looked at the girls, now playing quietly on the rug with toy animals Juliet had brought from town. Then she stood, walked over, and knelt between them. "Maisie." "Mara," she said softly, "do you want to stay here?" The girls looked at each other, then at Eli, then at Juliet, and in perfect silent unison they nodded. Maisie reached for Eli's hand. Mara tugged on Michelle's sleeve, then pointed at the painting on the wall, a butterfly navy, and blue, just like the one Juliet had helped them finish last week. Michelle straightened slowly. "I have to file a temporary review," she said. "But if it comes to court, I'll testify." Juliet's breath caught. "You will." Michelle smiled, lines at the corners of her eyes deepening. "I've worked 30 years in this job. You don't always get to witness something real. But today I did." She looked at Eli. "Don't screw it up." Then she left, closing the door gently behind her. That night, as snow began to fall again, Juliet and Eli sat on the porch, wrapped in separate quilts, steam rising from their mugs. "I don't think I breathed the entire visit," Juliet said, half laughing. "I thought you were perfect," Eli replied. She looked over at him. "We're not out of the woods yet." "No," he said. "But at least we're walking through them together." Juliet looked up at the stars, small and soft against the Wyoming dark, and let herself believe for the first time in years that maybe some things weren't meant to be fought alone. Inside, the girls slept side by side, holding hands beneath a quilt stitched with hope. And in the quiet that followed, the house felt more like a home than it ever had before. The first time Juliet walked into Eli's workshop, she sneezed twice. It was mid-morning, and the light cut in through the cracked barn window in golden sheets, catching the dust motes, mid-air, like snow that had lost its way. Tools lined the wall in imperfect symmetry, and sawdust clung to every surface like a second skin. The air smelled of cedar oil and something warmer like memory. "Sorry about the mess," Eli muttered, wiping his hands on a stained rag. Juliet laughed behind her sleeve. "I teach children, Eli. You think sawdust scares me?" He gave her a sheepish grin. Didn't expect you to show up with a box labeled lavender oils and citrus peels. Thought you were just bringing muffins. I'm full of surprises." The girls trailed behind her, each holding something. Maisie carried a mason jar of dried rose petals. Mara held a tiny bucket of beeswax pellets. Their steps were lighter now, more sure-footed. Since the social worker's visit, something in the air had shifted, not certainty, but possibility. And today, that possibility smelled like soap. It had been Juliet's idea, of course. "I used to make soap with my grandmother," she'd told Eli over dinner one night. "It's therapeutic, creative, and the girls would love it." Eli had shrugged. "All I've got is scrap wood tools and a lot of patience." "Perfect," Juliet replied. "Let's build something together." That word "together" settled somewhere deep in his chest, warm and unfamiliar. They started small. Eli built the molds from repurposed pine. The girls mixed oils and colors under Juliet's supervision, giggling when the lavender clashed with peppermint, then giggling harder when it somehow worked. They set up an assembly table between the workbench and the back window. Juliet brought an old typewriter to stamp craft paper wrappers. The girls doodled a logo, a butterfly, its wings shaped like musical notes. "What should we call it?" Eli asked one evening as they tested their first batch. Juliet looked at the swirls of pale purple and amber gold hardening in the wooden molds. She glanced at the twin girls, now dancing barefoot through curls of sawdust. "Ashes and lavender," she said softly. "Because that's where we started, and where we're going." Eli looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Ashes and lavender it is." Word spread faster than Eli expected. Juliet posted a few photos online, tagging a small community group page. Within 2 days, they had 6 custom orders. By the weekend, local shop owner Marla Denny stopped by the barn to ask if she could stock a dozen bars before the Christmas market. "People want real things," she told them, "not mass-produced garbage that smells like artificial lemons." "What you're making smells like." She inhaled deeply. "Hope?" Juliet smiled. "That's kind of our secret ingredient." Eli chuckled under his breath. "And here I thought it was goat milk." The rhythm became a kind of gentle magic. In the mornings, the girls did their reading and handwriting at the kitchen table. In the afternoons, they crafted soap-cut wrappers, organized scents. Juliet played music in the background, sometimes instrumental, sometimes folk, always soft enough that Eli could still hear the hum of his saw in the background. They became a unit, a rhythm, a family. And then, one cold Thursday morning, Juliet found Eli in the workshop staring at a small carved box, a prototype for a soap gift set. His hand trembled slightly as he traced the edge. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Leah. That's what we would have named her." Juliet said nothing, just stepped closer. "I kept her name off everything, even the nursery. Told myself it made it easier." He swallowed. But it didn't. It just made it quieter. Juliet gently reached for his hand, folding her fingers around his. "I never thought I'd have a reason to carve again," he admitted. "But this, making something that smells like memory instead of regret, I think she would have liked that." Juliet's eyes shimmered. "Then let's name this set after her." Eli looked at her, startled. "Lavender and cedar," she continued. "Warmth and strength, the Leah collection, just for Christmas." He blinked, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "She'd have liked you too." That night, as snow brushed gently against the window panes, the 4 of them sat at the kitchen table, wrapping soap bars in waxed paper and handwriting tiny tags. Maisie wrote in careful letters, "Handmade with love." Willow Creek, W.Y. Mara drew a butterfly beside every name. Juliet played soft music from a vinyl, Nathan's favorite rendition of Claire de Lune. Eli, without thinking, reached for her hand under the table. She didn't pull away. They stayed like that together, warm still while the song played through. Outside, the wind moved gently through the pines. Inside, the house smelled of sawdust, lavender, and something else entirely belonging. It started with a low hum in the air, a kind of static tension that settled in your skin before the snow ever fell. Eli had felt storms coming his whole life. You learned to read the wind when you lived alone in the Wyoming hills. You paid attention to the crows, to the stillness of the trees, to the way even the stovepipes seemed to groan with warning. But this one came harder than expected. By mid-afternoon, the sky had collapsed into a solid sheet of gray. The sun vanished. Visibility dropped to feet. And all the warmth that had filled the house for weeks, the scent of soap, the rhythm of laughter, the hum of music seemed to fade into the white void beyond the window. Juliet pulled the curtains closed as the first flakes thickened to fists. They're saying this might be the worst since '08. Eli stood by the hearth, arms crossed. I remember '08. Lost power for 4 days. Fence line snapped in half. Barn roof caved in. Maisie and Mara sat at the kitchen table pressing butterfly stamps onto gift tags, unaware of the tension tightening the air. We'll be okay, Juliet said, offering a smile she didn't quite believe. We've got food. Wood candles. Soap, Eli added dryly. Juliet laughed. Yes, plenty of soap. But when the lights flickered that evening just as they were lighting candles, Eli's smile faltered. The generator wouldn't start. The woodpile was damp from the sleet that had preceded the snow. And something in Eli, something he'd kept patched together with quiet routine and whispered hope, began to splinter. They ate by firelight soup, warmed over the cast-iron stove, stale bread, and the last of the canned peaches. The girls huddled in their quilts, telling each other stories in gestures and soft laughter. Juliet played a slow tune on her harmonica, a habit she'd picked up long ago from her husband and rediscovered only recently. Eli sat in silence, his eyes on the window. By the time night had fully fallen, the wind was howling. I should have fixed the vent on the attic before this hit, he muttered. Should have bought more salt. Should have, Eli, Juliet said gently. You did everything you could. Did I? He stood abruptly, pacing. I've been trying to hold this place together with scraps and second chances. These girls deserve more than a roof held up by nails I bent myself. Juliet rose. They don't care about the nails. They care about you. He turned, his voice low but strained. You don't know what it's like, losing a child before they even draw breath. Watching the woman you love walk out with the last pieces of who you were. And now I've built this fragile little thing again. And all it takes is one bad storm to knock it down. Juliet crossed the room, placing a hand gently on his chest. Then, we rebuild. Together. He looked at her eyes, dark and wounded. What if I'm not enough? You are. No, Juliet, I know you are, she said firmly. Because they're still here. They laugh when you walk in. They sleep soundly under your roof. They reach for your hand without hesitation. You didn't just save them, Eli. You made them feel safe. And that's more than most people ever do in this world. He dropped his head, the storm raging outside, matching the storm inside his chest. Juliet leaned in closer, her voice softening. And maybe they've saved you too. That night they moved the mattress from the girls' room to the main floor by the stove. The four of them lay bundled in quilts, candlelight flickering against the ceiling. The wind howled and shook the windows, but inside the quiet between them was steady. Maisie reached for Juliet's hand. Mara curled up against Eli's chest. No one spoke. They didn't need to. And in that silence, something beautiful happened. Mara sat up, slowly glanced at her sister, then began to hum. A single note, soft, clear. Maisie joined in. Juliet, eyes wide with wonder, recognized the melody. It was the lullaby she'd first played on Eli's piano. They remembered. And more than that, they were giving it back. She joined in, her voice trembling, harmonizing with their sweet, uncertain tones. Eli listened, eyes misted, unable to find his voice, but feeling the music settle into the corners of the room, like light through stained glass. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't rehearsed. It was a moment. And when it ended, the wind outside had quieted. The fire crackled gently, and Eli finally exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The next morning the storm had passed. Sunlight poured through the windows like forgiveness. Outside the barn still stood. The trees were bent, but rooted. And inside the house the air smelled faintly of lavender and ash and something new, something alive. Eli stood on the porch with Juliet mugs of hot coffee in their hands. "You think the roof held?" she asked. "Guess we'll find out." She leaned into him slightly, shoulder to shoulder. "Whatever broke, we'll fix it." He looked at her long and quietly. "You know," he said, voice low, "you keep showing up." Juliet smiled. "So do you." They watched as the girls stepped out into the snow boots, crunching arms, wide faces turned to the sky. Eli glanced at Juliet. "You ever think maybe storms don't come to break us, but to clear the air for something better?" Juliet slipped her hand into his. All the time, the Christmas market in Willow Creek was the kind of event that made time feel slower and sweeter. Wooden booths lined the snow-dusted park, draped in evergreen boughs and twinkle lights. Elderly couples in wool scarves strolled arm in arm, children licked cider sweet fingers, and the scent of cinnamon pine and freshly popped kettle corn floated through the air like a hymn from a forgotten chapel. Juliet tightened the scarf around Maisie's neck. "Stay close, okay? There'll be more people than you're used to." The twins nodded in perfect silence, their mittened hands tucked into the sides of her coat. They wore matching navy blue hats Juliet had knitted herself, each adorned with a small butterfly pin Eli had carved. "Don't let them wander," Eli said from behind the booth, brushing sawdust off the new soap display. "Last thing I need is to explain to Santa why we lost 2 elves." Juliet smirked. "We've rehearsed the emergency plan twice." "Don't worry." The booth looked beautiful. Under the carved wooden sign, ashes and lavender rows of wrapped soap bars sat neatly on linen cloth, each labeled by hand. The girls' newest blend, a cedar-lavender-vanilla combination named Leah's Grace, had its own basket. By 10 o'clock, the first wave of townspeople had already begun to linger, drawn in by the simple, soulful setup and the story behind it. It was Juliet's idea to include a framed note at the center of the display. "This soap is more than soap. It's the scent of safety, of second chances, of music returning to a house that forgot how to sing." By noon, they were nearly sold out. Then he appeared. An older man, tall, lean, wrapped in a dark wool coat and a gray scarf, paused at the booth, violin case in hand. His face was lined, his eyes sharp beneath thick brows. He looked at the display with unusual stillness. Juliet stepped forward. "Can I help you?" He didn't answer. He picked up one of the Leah's Grace bars, turned it slowly in his hands, and then looked past Juliet to the twins. Maisie and Mara had gone quiet. The man's eyes widened just slightly. Then he spoke, voice low and even. "Who are they?" Eli stiffened. "Is there a reason you're asking?" The man didn't blink. "They look like someone I used to know." Juliet exchanged a quick glance with Eli. "They came to us last winter," she said. "We're their guardians now." "Do they speak?" "Not much," Juliet replied. "But they remember." The man nodded almost imperceptibly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. A photograph. He handed it to Eli. It was an old black and white image, 2 little girls around 4 years old sitting at a piano. Their faces younger, rounder, but unmistakable. Behind them, a woman with soft eyes and a long braid smiling wide. "My daughter," the man said. "Her name was Willa. She died in a fire 5 years ago. I was out of the country at the time. Didn't even know she had children until weeks later. The authorities said the girls were presumed dead." His voice caught just for a second, but I never stopped looking. Juliet felt the blood drain from her face. Eli handed the photo back slowly. "You're their grandfather." The man gave a slow, quiet nod. "Name's Malcolm Yates. I used to teach violin in New York. Retired now. But I never gave up." Mara stepped forward then. Her hands trembled, but she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, a wrinkled corner of paper folded many times over. She held it out to him. Malcolm took it with reverence. It was the drawing from their very first day with Juliet, a piano, a butterfly, 2 girls holding hands under a tree. He stared at it a long while, then sank onto the nearby bench, silent tears running down his cheeks. Juliet crouched beside him. "They've been safe, I promise." "We didn't know," he shook his head. "No, you did exactly what I couldn't. You kept them warm, alive, whole." He looked at Eli. "What happens now?" Eli's jaw tightened. "That's not for me to say." Malcolm stood, slowly turned to the girls. "Do you know who I am?" Maisie looked to Mara. Then both looked at Juliet, then Eli. Mara stepped forward, placing a hand on Eli's. Juliet saw it clearly, the choice, not between blood and love, but between what was and what is. Malcolm nodded, his voice shaking. "I don't want to take them away. I just want to be part of whatever this is, if you'll let me." Eli swallowed hard. "You're welcome here, as much as they'll allow." Juliet smiled through tears. "Welcome to Willow Creek." Later that night, the house smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon again. The girls sat on the rug painting ornaments with Malcolm, now simply Grandpa Mal, who laughed each time Mara flicked glitter onto his shoes. Eli watched from the kitchen, a gentle peace resting in his chest. Juliet approached him, eyes tired but content. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Strangely. Because everything changed. Because everything clicked," he replied. "Like a note you've been trying to find. And it finally lands." She rested her head against his shoulder. "This is the miracle you know." He looked at her. "The girls," she said. "Finding them was a miracle. But keeping them, choosing them, that's ours." Outside, snow began to fall again, but it no longer felt like a threat. Only a memory. And inside, music returned to the house, and the laughter of girls, and the gentle hum of belonging. Eli stood in the doorway of the room that used to be called Leah's. For years, it had remained untouched, a shrine to a child who never breathed, never cried, never saw the ceiling stars he'd once taped above the crib. The curtains still bore tiny moons and clouds, and the rocking chair still creaked, like it remembered how to hum lullabies to no one. But tonight, everything was different. The crib had been replaced with 2 small beds side by side. New sheets, lavender and navy, were tucked tightly topped with quilts, stitched by Juliet, and patched with scraps of the twins' old sweaters. At the foot of each bed sat a tiny handmade trunk for their toys. One had a carved butterfly on it, the other a single musical note. On the wall above them, Juliet had painted a mural, a blue sky with wild flowers stretching toward the horizon, and in the center, 2 girls holding hands beneath a tree with heart-shaped leaves. It was the room Eli never thought he'd build again, and it was perfect. He turned to Juliet, who stood beside him quietly, her eyes soft. "I hope this is enough." Juliet placed a hand on his arm. "They don't need perfect. They just need you. And you," he added. She smiled. "We make a good." "We don't, He didn't reply, but reached down and gently interlaced his fingers with hers. Behind them, the girls peeked into the room. Maisie stepped forward first, wide-eyed. Mara followed slower, more cautious. They moved to their beds, touched the quilts, the trunks, the painted sky. Juliet knelt down between them. "This is your room," she said softly. "You get to decide what goes here. You get to hang your drawings, put stickers on the trunks, move the beds if you want." Maisie looked up at Eli. Mara reached for Juliet's hand. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. Juliet saw it in their eyes. Recognition, safety, belonging. Mara climbed onto her bed and placed her stuffed lamb, the one Juliet had rescued from a thrift store months ago, on the pillow. Maisie opened her trunk and gently placed inside a drawing, the one with the blue butterfly and the piano. A room with 2 beds and 1 heart. Later that evening, when the girls had fallen asleep under the soft light of a salt lamp, Eli and Juliet sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared quilt. The December air was crisp, but not bitter. The stars were clear, unashamed to be seen. Malcolm had left that morning, promising to return for Christmas Eve. Juliet leaned against Eli, her head resting on his shoulder. "They chose to stay." "They did," he murmured. "But you're still afraid." He didn't deny it. Why, he took a long breath. "Because everything in my life that felt this good disappeared." Juliet pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "And what if it's different this time? What if it isn't?" he asked. "What if the system changes its mind? What if Malcolm decides he wants custody? What if they grow up and forget we ever mattered?" Juliet reached for his hand. "Then we love them anyway. We show up anyway. We choose them anyway." Eli was quiet. "I can't promise forever," she continued. "No one can. But I can promise today, and tomorrow, and every ordinary moment after, if you'll let me." Eli turned toward her, eyes darker with something tender. "And what about you?" he asked. "What if you change your mind?" Juliet smiled. "I already have." And then, for the first time since the girls arrived, for the first time since Leah's name was spoken aloud in that workshop, full of sawdust and grief, Juliet kissed him. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't hurried, it was true. 2 people quietly mending. The next morning, snow fell again, gentle, lazy flakes that made the world quieter, softer still. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon, oatmeal, and pine. Juliet stood at the counter tying her apron as Eli flipped pancakes shaped like butterflies. He was terrible at it, but the girls laughed anyway. They ate together at the table. Mara spilled syrup on her shirt. Maisie drew stars on the napkin. Eli joked that one day they'd open a soap and breakfast shop. Juliet said she'd paint the sign herself. It was all so normal, and for them, that was the miracle. Juliet brought out a small gift box after breakfast. "For the girls," she said. "But I want you to see it first." Inside were 2 silver lockets, simple, elegant, etched with their initials. On one side, M&M, on the other, Chosen. Loved, always. "We'll give them on Christmas," she said. "Just in case." Eli nodded, understanding. "In case life changes again. But also in case it doesn't." He looked at her. "I didn't think I'd have room in my heart for anything else." Juliet reached across the table, touching his hand. "Hearts grow, Eli. That's what they're meant to do." The girls ran past them, chasing each other with leftover wrapping paper rolls, giggling like they'd invented laughter. And for the first time in years, Eli didn't worry about what might come next. He was too busy living what he had. The town hall of Willow Creek had never looked more alive. Twinkle lights draped every beam. A hand-carved wooden nativity scene stood quietly near the entrance, flanked by bundles of evergreen branches tied with red ribbon. The air inside smelled of mulled cider, cinnamon rolls, pine needles, and 100 years of shared stories. Juliet stood backstage, smoothing Maisie's hair, her fingers trembling slightly. "You ready?" she whispered. Maisie nodded. Mara adjusted the tiny bow on her sister's blouse and then reached for Juliet's hand. She squeezed once, not out of fear, but reassurance. Juliet swallowed the lump rising in her throat. It had been her idea, of course, a quiet suggestion during Thanksgiving dinner that the girls might play a simple piece at the town's annual Christmas recital. Eli had raised an eyebrow, unsure, but the girls had surprised them both by nodding in perfect unison. They hadn't said yes. They didn't need to. The recital was tradition, a gentle hometown affair, where anyone who could hold a note or recite a poem got a chance to shine. Kids in snowflake sweaters recited scripture, teenagers played off-key violin duets, and old-timers told long-winded stories that made the crowd laugh, even when they didn't quite follow the punchline. Tonight the West family would close the program. Juliet had called them that in passing. Earlier that week, the West family and Eli hadn't corrected her. He hadn't even blinked. Eli stood by the piano, nervously rubbing the back of his neck. He wore a charcoal vest and rolled sleeves, his hair tucked behind his ears. He hadn't seen this many people in one place since Mary's memorial. Juliet stepped beside him. "You okay?" He nodded. "I'm just wondering how we got here." She looked out at the crowd, every seat taken, every face warm and familiar. "One good day at a time. Do they really want to do this?" he asked, glancing toward the twins waiting just behind the curtain. Juliet smiled. "They asked to go last. I think they want to be remembered." Eli exhaled slowly. "They already are." The lights dimmed. Applause faded. The final act was announced: Maisie and Mara West, accompanied by Juliet Hale. No one corrected the surname. The girls stepped out together, dressed in matching navy dresses with white collars and tiny silver butterflies stitched at their hems. The crowd murmured softly, not in confusion, but in admiration. They were beautiful, and they were home. Juliet followed with quiet grace and took her seat at the piano. The girls stood center stage facing the audience, a sea of familiar faces: shopkeepers, neighbors, Michelle the caseworker sitting front row beside Malcolm Yates, tears already forming in his eyes. Maisie looked at Mara. Mara gave the faintest nod. Juliet played the first chords, soft and slow, the same lullaby she'd once played in Eli's cabin, the one the girls had picked up without words, without instruction. But this time they sang. Together. Their voices, still light and childlike, floated over the crowd like snowflakes, fragile, individual, but together, forming something breathtaking. The lyrics weren't fancy. They weren't even entirely clear. But they carried every note of their story: the cold, the silence, the laughter, the trust. Each phrase a thread weaving the people in the room into a tapestry of memory and hope. Eli stood in the wings, unmoving. He hadn't known they could sing like that. He hadn't known his heart could carry so much. When the final note fell, a silence blanketed the room. Then the applause came. It began with Malcolm standing clapping through tears. Then Michelle. Then the mayor. Then the entire room rising to their feet, as one, cheering, whistling, crying, clapping. Julia turned to the girls and smiled through tears. Maisie took Mara's hand and led her to center stage. Together they bowed. Eli wiped his eyes and stepped out to meet them. The girls didn't hesitate. They ran straight to him, wrapping their arms around his waist. Juliet joined them, wrapping an arm across all three. Someone snapped a photo. Later, that picture would hang in the town hall for years, labeled simply, "Christmas Miracle 2023. That night back home, under the soft lights of the living room tree, Juliet presented the girls with their lockets. Silver. Simple. One for each. Inside, engraved in delicate script, chosen. Loved. Always. Dad and Jules. Maisie opened hers first. She blinked slowly. Then, without a word, She leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Juliet's neck. Mara pressed hers to her chest and looked at Eli. She didn't speak, but her eyes glistened and her lips moved just once. Daddy. He felt it like a thread pulling everything inside him back together. Juliet leaned her head against his shoulder. You still afraid? Eli looked around at the tree, the girls, the fire, the lockets, the picture of them taken just hours ago, already pinned to the fridge. No, he said. Not anymore. Outside, the world was still cold, still dark. But inside, there was music again. There was light. And for the first time in years, there was nothing missing. Spring arrived in Willow Creek, like a breath held too long finally being released. The snow melted in hushed retreat, revealing stubborn crocuses blooming through cracks in the frost-hardened soil. The pines stretched taller. The creek behind Eli's property began to sing again, its water moving with new life. In the barn, the scent of sawdust mingled with wild lavender. The soap table had grown into something more permanent, now fitted shelves, better tools, and a new handmade sign that read, Ashes and Lavender. Best, by Grace. Juliet insisted on adding that last part. Grace, she said, wasn't just what saved them. It's what they chose. The house had changed too. What was once a place of silence and half-finished repairs had become a home full of little footsteps. Music drifting through the open windows, and laundry always on the line. There were drawings taped to the fridge, muddy boots at the door, and a calendar covered in hearts and stars, and notes like, Butterfly Field Trip, Pack Snacks. Eli found himself humming without realizing it. He cooked more, laughed more, loved not cautiously, but fully. That morning, as he stood by the porch railing sipping coffee, he watched Maisie and Mara running barefoot across the yard, chasing the wind with butterfly nets Malcolm had gifted them at Easter. Malcolm had become a fixture in their lives, not hovering, not reclaiming, but showing up. On Sundays, he played violin for the girls beneath the willow tree. On Thursdays, he helped Juliet teach them harmony, and on quiet afternoons, Eli often found him sitting silently near the creek, eyes closed, as if listening to something only he could hear. Inside, Juliet was placing the finishing touch on a shelf of journals in the reading nook she and Eli had built together, one for each member of the family. Blank pages waiting for stories. She caught his eye through the window and smiled, soft knowing. It had been 3 months since the adoption papers were finalized. 3 months since the county, with Michelle's full endorsement, granted full guardianship to Eli and Juliet West. The girls had chosen their name and chosen their family. That evening, Juliet lit candles along the porch and placed a simple dinner on the long wooden table Eli had crafted by hand. Pasta with garden herbs, fresh bread, raspberry cobbler. The 4 of them sat together beneath the twinkling porch lights as the sky shifted from gold to indigo. Juliet raised a glass of lemonade. To miracles, she said. Maisie raised hers too. To soap, she added with a proud grin. Mara giggled. And music. Eli lifted his own. And to the day, 2 little girls changed everything. Juliet leaned in close. You mean the day we let them? After dinner, the girls curled on the couch with picture books, while Juliet and Eli washed dishes in the sink, their elbows bumping in a rhythm that had by now become second nature. Juliet turned to him, towel in hand. There's something I've been wanting to ask. Eli raised an eyebrow. Sounds serious. She smiled shyly. Not serious. Just special. She pulled something from her apron pocket, a small wooden ring box, carved with a butterfly and a musical note. He stared at her. She opened it slowly. Inside, 2 silver rings, simple and hand-forged. One for him, one for her. His breath caught. Juliet? I'm not asking for a wedding, she whispered. I'm asking for a life. One where we keep choosing each other day by day. where the hard parts don't scare us, where we're just us. Eli took the box from her hands and looked at it for a long moment. Then he reached inside, pulled out the smaller ring, and slid it onto her finger. "Juliet Hale," he said quietly, "I choose you. Every ordinary miraculous day." She kissed him there in the kitchen, surrounded by soap-scented towels, and 1,000 little reasons why this life was worth living. Later, after the girls had gone to bed, they sat together on the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt. The stars blinked softly above them, and the wind moved gently through the trees. Juliet rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about how unlikely this all was every day? A letter in the floorboard, a blanket in the snow, a pair of silent girls who turned our whole world inside out," Eli said with a smile. Juliet nodded. "I used to think miracles were grand, loud, dramatic." And now she looked at him, eyes shining. "Now I think they whisper." He pulled her closer. "I think they choose us." She looked down at the locket around her neck, still shining faintly beneath her shirt. Inside it, the same words they had given the girls: chosen, loved, always. She'd never believed more in anything. The last lines of this chapter were never spoken out loud, but written months later by Mara and Maisie. In their journals, "We were not lost girls. We were waiting to be found by the right people. And now we know the miracle wasn't that they saved us. The miracle was that we saved each other. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know." Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read every one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.